All right. I always forget to wait for that to start. Welcome everyone to our first session of the day. We have just a reminder that we are recording the session. It will be available for about 4 weeks on Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday YouTube channel if you want to go back and look for it. Also a reminder, I know she just said it, but if you're a CCSD employee, make sure you put your name and that you're a CCSD employee in the chat both now and at the end. Dr. Bickmore has also stated not to jump from class to class. If there's another session you want to see, you can watch that recording later. Any questions, comments, or statements that you want to put, you can put in the chat and we will have time at the end to address all of the questions. Without further ado, Nikki, go ahead.
All right, good morning, everybody. I hope I gave all my shout outs. I feel like we should just sit here and chit chat with friends, but we can't do that. Hey, can I get sharing screen share privileges so I can bring up my thingy? Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go. So let's bring this up and get started. There's always that bar that gets in the way. Okay. So welcome to, just kidding. Welcome to Putting an Elementary Twist on the YA Summit Authors with me, Nikki Bylina-Streets, and for the 2021 Summit. So first we're gonna get started. Like, who is this girl? Why is she presenting at the YA Summit? So I just finished up my 20th year teaching in Clark County School District, yay me! And 17 of those years has been as an elementary school librarian. That's my true passion. I am a teacher as well, but I like to be considered a librarian. I'm wearing my little pin right here because that's where my heart lies. I'm also a part-time instructor for UNLV and RPDP, which is super fun to have some of my students in the class. I'm glad you guys actually see me do something because we've been virtual and just online this whole time. I'm also a lead curator for the poetry, humor, and verse vertical for a company called Bookalicious. You should check them out. Super fun to get ideas from them. But none of that stuff really matters. That's all just the stuff you have to put, right, to show that you're, are willing and able to speak at these kinds of things. What really matters is I'm a self-proclaimed lover of books. Even though I am an elementary school librarian, I love all books, right? I believe that as a librarian, we should read widely. And yeah, you got to read the stuff that you like, but you got to read the things that are important in nature, right? And things that the kids like so that you could become like the best librarian that you could possibly be. Also, I'd like to say that I'm an admirer of authors and illustrators because I think that's really important, especially in the elementary school years. I almost put author stalker, but I figured if I had to send this out to people, it was probably not a good idea to put that kind of verbiage on there. So, subtle flex. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see me and none other than Angie Thomas. And the reason I put this picture in my presentation is, yes, because it's a subtle flex, but also to show the reason why elementary people should be coming to things that are considered YA. It doesn't matter. It's just learning about what our kids are reading, okay? So this picture was actually taken April of 2017, and it's at the LA Times Book Festival that is held on the USC campus. It's always around spring break time. I am a frequent flyer of this book festival, number one, because it's close, number two, because it's free, and I have met some of the most amazing authors there. Now, you're probably thinking like, whatever, like Angie Thomas, she's super popular, she writes The Hate You Give and so many other important books, like it's not a big deal. This was 2017. This was only 2 months after her book was published in February of 2017. It hadn't risen to all the glory that it has at this time, right? It hadn't made that mark yet. Just look at the line. There's only like 3 ladies waiting in line behind me, right? Now, if you were to go to see Angie Thomas at something, I'm sure the line would be wrapped around the building. Okay, I walked right up to her. It was amazing. These are the reasons why if you are involved in education or in library, you should be attending every single thing you possibly can. I picked up this book when I was at the Tucson Book Festival because it was like new and noteworthy. And I was like, I wonder what this is. Read it, beautiful. Also, this was 2017, so 4 years ago. My son was probably only 10 years old at the time. And just recently, he's middle school going into high school. Mom, do you have any good books I could read? And he's like moving out of that elementary school zone, right? I gave him this book. It's one of his new favorites, right? He read it last summer, actually. This is why we should be going to anything. We shouldn't label it just YA or elementary school or middle grade. We should be moving across all of those genres. Also, I love to document everything. So you're going to see lots of pictures throughout this thing. So why should they go to, oh, I moved it on that screen, but not this screen. There we go. Okay, so like I said, we should be moving across all of those age levels. Even if you are an elementary school librarian or a high school librarian or an adult reader, like when we read across those verticals, we really get a whole understanding about what our kids are going through and what they're reading and what they're about to encounter. It's so, so crucially important. Also, when you attend these kinds of events, it's like the ultimate PLC, right? I know if you're in Clark County School District, we all kind of groan when it's like PLC time because it's a task that you have to do, right? Cross it, check it off your box. But I think this is the epitome of what a PLC should be, right? Professional learning community where you get together with all of the people that are like-minded and in it for their children. Also, it creates so much inspiration. I mean, how many of us just came out of K.A. Holt's speak? Beautiful, amazing words. I have a whole notepad already written of just the things that she said, right? That I need to come back to and process and ruminate around. Also, just the networking. It's so amazing to just get to know all of these people. And if you come to enough YA summits, then you'll be like me and roped into presenting at one of them. And it's just plain fun, guys. It's just plain fun. All right, so before we move on to this current session of YA authors, we got to talk about some past memories. I just gave you all the reasons why elementary school teachers and librarians should be coming to YA things, but let me just show you some concrete things. So on the right-hand side, that's Meg Medina, right? I mean, the famous Meg Medina. We got to just walk right up to her and talk to her. I sat in concurrent sessions with her before we went into COVID times and went all virtual, right? This is a picture of my daughter. I brought her to the signing session with me. It was amazing. And this was the year that Mercy Suarez Changes Gears was on the Battle of the Books list for Clark County School District. My daughter had just been on a team that made it into the Final Four of her school, and she got to meet one of the authors that she read her book. Like, I'm sorry, it doesn't get any better than that. Just as a parent, I'm not even talking as a teacher, as a parent, it doesn't get any better than that. And if you were at Meg Medina's keynote speech, it's beautiful. She talked about clave and the beat of your life. And I think that's just so true in all the literature we read. Is like, we got to give kids real, authentic, just true literature about their lives. When I talked about networking, so Dr. Sarah Donovan was the chair of K.A. Holt's speak just a few minutes ago, right? I admire that woman so, so much. I have listened to her speak at a couple of the YA summits, and I just love her. I think she's just very passionate about what she does. I love that she's a true teacher, right? She's not, forgive me for saying this, like an academic. Like, she just came out of 20 years teaching in the junior high classroom. This was a session that I attended of hers last year. You can tell it was virtual format. And she put this quote on her screen: "Nurture your reading life so that you can nurture students' reading lives." And I think that's so important. A lot of times we just fall back on what we were raised on, right? Like, I remember stories from my childhood youth. Like, I loved Where the Red Fern Grows. Was the first time I ever saw my male fourth grade teacher cry. And I was like, what? Guys can cry? Because my dad wasn't like that. I remember reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in my 5th grade class. And we had a big chocolate party before you couldn't do those kinds of things anymore, right? So I think it's so important to honor the things of your past, but also to move forward. And a lot of the things that our kids are going through, we maybe never have experienced, or there wasn't literature that represented those things when we were growing up. So I think it's important to keep reading widely so that we can nurture our students' reading lives. So we can pull things out. Hey, you like this? Let's pull this book out. Just offering a variety of suggestions. Last year, I also got to meet virtually Candace Fleming. And I love this because she came to the YA conference and spoke about the rise and fall of Charles Lindbergh. If you haven't read this book, it is beautiful. It's highly graphic, lots of, it's a nonfiction text, but lots of like primary resources that are included in it. When you think of Charles Lindbergh, you think of this great American hero, right? These are the people that we learned about in school. I'm here to say that that's wrong, right? Like he was kind of a really bad man, but we've glorified him. I think it's important to share these new stories, and they're not new. I mean, these are things that have happened, but the way they've been told in the past is not necessarily the truth. I mean, think of all the different things that you learned as a child that as you grow up and learn more and people are publishing in a more accurate way, you're like, oh, that's not the story that I knew growing up. It's powerful and moving. Like I know Candace Fleming as the Muncha author of the little bunny rabbits that try to get into the garden, but she has so many more powerful books that we can show our kids that vertical alignment, right? Sure, we read Muncha when they're in kindergarten through second grade, but then in third through fourth, fifth grade, we start reading The Giant Squid. And then when they go into middle school, they're ready for a book like The Rise and Fall of Charles Lindbergh. So when we read these books, we open up our world to more truths that are out there. And then of course, okay, here you go, Morgan. Anytime you come to a Y8 summit and you hear Dr. Bickmore speak, he always cries, always cries. But I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world, right? To just see anybody be so moved by their work that it brings them to tears. And it's not necessarily happy tears or sad tears, right? It's just, you're just moved so much that it makes you emotional. And I think that's a beautiful thing. All right, so now that you know a little bit about me and just what I believe about our YA Summit on a whole, let's go ahead and get into what is advertised in the program. So it says that I'm going to be putting an elementary twist on YA authors. So we've heard from the best in YA literature. Now we're going to use some picture books to pair with those things and some ways to use them. So basically, I feel like this title really should have been Watch Nikki Go Down a Rabbit Hole, because that's how I work, right? I attend all these great sessions. I take manic notes, and then I research it all. Like that's what librarians do, right? You go back and, okay, here's this person. What did they write? And you know what? Even though this is advertised as a YA summit, you'll see that a lot of these authors surprisingly have written children's books as well. And it's a beautiful thing. So what I like to bring mention to you though is the twist that's in my title. Some of you know me from classes, and I'm really big on definitions because I don't consider myself to have a very broad vocabulary. That's just not me by nature. So I'm always looking things up. That's part of my notes. And so when I put the elementary twist, I was trying to be cute and cheeky, kind of like what K.A. Holt said in her thing. Sometimes you shine in order to hide, right? I was trying to be just cute and cheeky. But when I looked up the definition of twist, it is a really beautiful definition. It means to unite by winding. And how gorgeous is that, right? We're at a YA summit and a lot of us are here because of this elementary track, but we can take all these things we're learning from this YA summit and wind it together, unite them so that we can bring those things down to our elementary learners. And don't worry, I'm going to throw in a few novels along the way for my upper elementary school teachers. So my first keynote person that we're going to talk with was Izmatelli Perkins. What a beautiful person inside and out. And in her bio, it says that Natalie means that she's friendly. And I mean, look at her bio pic. She's laughing and she's embracing life. Like her keynote speech was so moving and powerful and just so honestly her. So I love that. But she does talk a lot about how she moved around a lot as a kid. And especially if you're here from CCSD, you know how transient our populations can be. So they're not necessarily world traveling like Natalie's biography suggests, but can you imagine? I mean, my whole life growing up, I think I had 3 homes, right? And I think 3 homes in my whole life. I remember how like hard it was to move, and that was just to a bigger house in a nicer area, right? Like, oh, I got to leave all my friends. Can you imagine if you are one of our students that is moving from apartment deal to apartment deal and how hard that is on you, right? That sense of being in between and never having like a permanent home. So I think that is a beautiful thought that Natalie brings up. And she's like one of these authors that I told you, she's known for her YA titles, but she does have some of these picture books. So very Dora the Explorer-ish is how they brand it, but that's okay. I mean, whether or not you like Dora the Explorer or not, I love it. My kids were brought up in it, so, you know, I love it so much. But this is a beautiful book that we can use with our kids to just show them that it's okay to be in between, right? It's okay not to belong in one spot or another, to have to whisk, right? To combine all of your things together. So Dana, this is what I was going to talk about. So how can we use this in the classroom? So this blank face right here, one of our classmates, Dana and I, when we took the writing class, if anybody joined Ben Cook in the Southern Nevada Writing Project session a couple of days ago, I would highly suggest that you sign up for the writing project. Yes, it's a demanding work schedule because you're writing, and that's not something that's natural to me, but it's beautiful because it helps you write and just be a part of a really great community. So one of our teacher friends that was in that class, Aileen, she brought this session to us. She did this with her kids. She had the kids, and she teaches fourth grade, write on the face the things that people see in their classroom, right? So if I were to do this activity, I would put, oh, I have a cute pink bookshelf. These are the things that you see, right? You see my librarian pin, right? You see my pink, like how much I adore and admire pink. But then on the outside of the face, the things that you wish people would see, but they don't necessarily see. The fact that I'm wearing flip-flops right now because I have old lady feet, right? The fact that my anxiety is crazy high because these things make me incredibly nervous, but I love them at the same time. So this is a beautiful lesson that you can incorporate with your students so that whatever they're comfortable sharing, they can show people who they are as a person that other people see, but also the things that are behind them that they may not see. So I thought this was a beautiful lesson to teach to our kids. So some companion books that we can bring in too is this book called The Heart of Mi Familia by Carrie Lara. Carrie Lara is such a beautiful writer. She's actually a psychologist by trade, if you look up her website. And she writes these books because she is married to a Venezuelan man, and her daughter is kind of caught in between, right? Carrie is a white woman, her husband's Venezuelan, and you can see that reflected in some of the illustrations here. But having these kinds of books where kids are kind of blended or in between, they don't necessarily fit in one box or another, I think those are important stories to have on our bookshelves. Also, this book, Blended by Sharon Draper, which is one of my one of my favorite all-time authors. She writes such important books, is about this 11-year-old girl named Isabella. Her parents are divorced. One of her parents is white, one of her parents is black. One of her parents, after the divorce, is very wealthy and lives in the fanciest house, but her other parent lives in a smaller, more modest house because the money is not with that parent. So beautiful stories to bring those into your classroom so kids can see, like, you don't have to be one thing or another. You can be a mix of different things. You can be a twist. Also, what I want to say too is all these books that we bring up in this session are everyday books. Carrie Ann did a great job of saying that too. Like, we don't just get out LGBTQ plus books during the month of June. We don't just get out African-American biographies in the month of February. We don't just get out Asian Pacific books in the month of April, right? These books need to be in our libraries and on our bookshelves all year round. So I kind of like that idea of having two copies of the books, one you can put on display and one you could have like circulating all the time. But I wanted to suggest this too. I don't think you always have to have a grand plan to share a story with kids. I mean, yes, everything needs to be supported by your standards. That's what we do as teachers. But why not just keep a collection of the books that you read together? So on the left are, I love this. I think it's gorgeous and beautiful. I also know it's not very practical to print out color copies of all the books that you read. Yeah, a lot of us teach in CCSD. I don't even know where a color printer is in my school. So there you go on that. And I don't know, that's a lot of ink to spend on it. I think it's a beautiful idea. It presents nicely. But on the right is kind of an alternative. You can make this little bookshelf a bulletin board bookshelf and label all of the books that you've read together in a more budget-friendly way, right? You can see the teacher just kind of wrote them on there. So I do want to bring in this concept of all these books that we're reading are everyday books. They're not just for a certain month of the year, right? Or because something has arisen in our worlds. So our next keynote author is Sharon Flake. I just love her. She's so cheery and fun. I'm so jealous that Morgan got to sit and be her moderator. I think that's so awesome. So as per Sharon's biography, she says she writes about African-American youth. She takes on the tough topics and shines light onto people and places that society doesn't always care to see. She said she's an inner city baby at heart, and communities like the one she grew up in shall forever remain in her blood. So she likes to share those kinds of voices, as in the book, The Skin I'm In, and multiple other books that she has written. But did you know she wrote this picture book? This picture book was published in 2016. It's been around a little while. It's called You Are Not a Cat. And then the little duck is saying meow. So you kind of see where I'm going with this, right? Like we can take what we're learning at these YA summits, but a lot of them just have really beautiful themes that we can take and twist into elementary school. The reason why I put this book on here is because, like I said, not all of our kids fit into certain boxes, right? This duck, how the story goes, he finds leaves and he makes leaves so he can look like a cat. An acorn falls out of the tree, he takes that acorn and puts it on a necklace because that's just who Duck is. But Cat is very upset about it because Duck is not a cat. But that's okay. We can embrace each other's differences and we can be who we want to be. And it's not necessarily who we want to be, just who we really are. So that's what I love about this is like, yeah, these people are branded as YA authors, but they have other books too that are important to note. So here's some other books that we can bring in to our libraries and classrooms that have to do with not checking a box, right? More like gender fluidity. I love this book, Red, A Crayon Story. Michael Hall has actually, since this book was published in 2016, made a couple of other ones like Swing and Frankencrayon that have this kind of general idea or theme where just because your label says you are one thing, that doesn't mean that's necessarily who you are on the inside. And if you haven't read this book, that's what it's about. It's about a red crayon. That's what his label says, but on the inside, he's blue, right? And that's what he's good at. He's good at drawing blue. Of course, I have to bring in a book that talks about pink because a lot of conversations that I have with my students in the library, I hear that's a girl book or that's a boy book, right? Or that's a girl color and that's a boy color. And I'm always trying to get my kids, no, books are just books, right? Colors are just colors. If you like it, you read it. So Pink is for Boys is such a cute little story. I love, love, love it. And let's see if I can bring up the preview real quick. It's just from Amazon, but I just want to show you just a little bit of it. Let's see, how do I scroll down here? Bear with me. So Pink is for Boys by Rob Perlman. Pink is for boys and girls. Look at that cute illustration. I mean, I adore it, but I love the color pink, but it's beautiful, right? You see the little boy wearing pink, you see all the pink background. We don't know if this is that little girl's room or the little boy's room, and it doesn't really matter, does it, right? They're just having fun, and they look good. And bows and fancy clothes. Just kids having fun and being who they are. Blue is for girls and boys. Two teammates. And then there you go. So you can look up the rest. And now I feel like I'm going to have a hard time getting back to where I need to be. But I wanted to show it to you because I think it's important for you to actually see those inside of the books and not just the front covers, right? Taking a look at what's inside. And that's what this whole thematic part is about, is taking a look at the whole inside of a person, which I really, really love. Julian is a Mermaid is about a little boy that's riding home from a pool with his grandma, and he sees these three fabulous women on the subway, and they're all dressed up, he thinks, as mermaids. They have beautiful dresses on and these gorgeous shell earrings, and he likes mermaids, so he starts dressing up on it. Who cares? Julian is a boy, but it doesn't matter if he likes mermaids. That's what makes his heart happy. And that's what this whole conference is about, right? Amplifying joy in the hearts and minds of our readers. And hey, go for it. I really love this book, Mixed, a colorful story. I'll read you a little bit about it. It says, red, yellows, and blues, all special in their own ways, all living in harmony until one day a red says reds are the best and starts a colorful kerfuffle. When the colors decide to separate, is there anything that can change their minds? A yellow, a blue, and a never before seen color might just save the day in this inspiring book about color, tolerance, and embracing differences. It's super, super cute. I just love it. Move to the next screen. There we go. So again, what I would like to just suggest is that we celebrate our uniqueness, right? Every one of us is unique in its own different way, and I think we should celebrate those things. Yes, it can be scary if there's something new and different, but we can move past that and make sure that everybody feels loved and welcomed within our spaces. So our next keynote author is Joelle Knowles, and she says that she likes to share truth, right? She likes to share truth with her readers. Here's some of the blurbs from her book: an unflinching story of a troubled friendship and one girl's struggle to come to terms with secrets and shame and find her power to heal. After fathering a baby, a teenager moves in with his karate-loving uncle and tries to come to terms with his guilt and find a way to forgive. A gritty and unflinching portrayal of a day like any other, with ordinary traumas, heartbreak, and revenge. I love that wording of ordinary trauma, right? It's such an oxymoron, such a juxtaposition of words, but it's beautiful, right? We all have these ordinary traumas within our lives, and so do our students as well. So when I was thinking about Joelle Knowles, I was like, ooh, this one's a little bit tough to bring into the elementary world, but it can be done. So what I would like to suggest is that all of Joelle Knowles' books are maybe about identity, right? Finding your place within this world. And of course, then we have the littles, like, they're still finding their place, and a lot of what they are is what their parents present to them. But these are some of the books that I think are beautiful to present about identity. The Day That You Begin by Jacqueline Woodson. I mean, one of my all-time favorites and true heroes, right? There's always going to be that day when you're in a room alone and there's no one else that's quite like you. A little story is my daughter is 6th grade going into 7th grade. She made a big decision to go to her middle school for summer school, which is a big step for her because she doesn't like to be alone. And this shine in order to hide quote that K.A. Holt brought up this morning really speaks to me about my daughter, because she's always been very exuberant and expressive and dramatic, right? But she's very insecure inside. She has troubles learning sometimes, and that can be hard on her. So I feel like she tries to hide, some of her struggles by putting up this brave front face. And she told me on her first day of summer school, Mom, I had to sit at a table all by myself because I didn't know anybody. And I asked her, I was like, well, how did that make you feel? She goes, well, I felt lonely, but I was excited because I knew I was going to make more friends. I'm going to try not to get emotional, right? What a beautiful thing that she felt secure enough to go sit by herself, because that's just what she needed to do at that moment, but knew that new friends were right around the corner. And I would hope that every kid would have that experience, right? That every kid would be able to be secure enough in themselves and be hopeful about what is just around the corner. I love the book, Not Quite Narwhal, just because it's so darn cute, but it's about that being in between again, right? And Gaston by Kelly DiPuccio is one of my all-time favorites, not only because it's illustrated by Christian Robinson, who I adore, but it's just a beautiful gender-bending story. So if you've read it, there's a companion book called Antoinette. Gaston is a French bulldog, adorable, that gets mixed up in a poodle family. So you know the stereotypes with different dogs, right? I mean, a French bulldog is bougie enough, but a poodle is even more bougie, right? So Gaston grows up in this poodle family, and he's just different than what you would consider a bulldog to be. And it winds up that he got switched with a poodle. And so this one poodle went to go live with a family of French bulldogs, right? But it's okay. It's a beautiful story. Gaston is the little boy bulldog that actually winds up with Antoinette, a girl poodle. And Antoinette, the girl poodle, winds up being like head security dog. And Gaston, the male poodle, stays at home with the puppies. It's beautiful. It's not what you expect, but it's there. It's beautiful. It's finding your identity and being okay with it. Uni the Unicorn is a story about believing. And if you've ever read this, it's about the unicorn that is living with other unicorns, and they don't believe that little girls are real, that children are real. And so it's just kind of different perspective, a different shift on finding that identity. And this unicorn is adamant. Yes, little girls, little people really do exist. And the unicorns are like, nah, no, they don't. But this unicorn, Uni, is very comfortable and confident in what they believe. So I'd like to propose to you how we can use this in the classroom is a Venn diagram. It's been around forever, right? And you're probably like, really, Nikki, this is nothing original and new. But just like we said in the opening speaking today, we are all unique in our own way, but I bet you if we try hard, we can find that we fit within other people too, right? I bet you if I sat down with every single one of you that are in this session, I'm unique in one way, but I share something in common with you too. And I think that's important for our kids to know. And when we do a lot of this like Venn diagramming and talk about similarities and differences and things that we share, that brings that twist together again, right? Combining things. Like I could sit in with a classroom of somebody that maybe I don't like or I've just never had any experience with. But if I sat down and we actually list some of the things that we're good at or that we share in common, we'll have a better understanding of each other. And somebody put in the chat of KA's thing is the best thing we can do as teachers is to just listen, right? And I think our students need to do a little bit of that too. It's just listening to each other and cueing in on what do we share in common. Okay, so that brings us to our next keynote authors. They shared a panel together, Eric Gansworth and Cynthia Leitick-Smith. The most important thing that I want to say about these two authors is that they are from Indigenous tribes, which is such a beautiful thing. So not only do they represent diversity within their writing, they are diverse as well as people. They are diverse people as well. What I'd like to say about these stories is another thing that I said earlier. We don't just bring these out during Thanksgiving time. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but a lot of times I feel like our students think that Native Americans are a thing of the past. Right? They were part of the first Thanksgiving. They're just not around anymore, but that could be further from the truth. So some of these beautiful books, like We Are the Water Protectors that just won the Newbery Award 2021. And honestly, it's just so gorgeous. The illustrations, I mean, no wonder it won the Caldecott, right? It's gorgeous. The watercolor, the rhythm, the beautiful imagery within the story. But one of my favorites is this fry bread story for not only the story it represents, but Juana Martinez Neal, the illustrator of this book, is one of my all-time favorites. She's on my bucket list. I have to meet her. The beautiful imagery that she presents within this story, the different kinds of body types, which is something that I'm really fond of. They're not all just skinny people in this story. There's some big ladies in this story, and they're just so beautiful. It also features people that have tattoos, which is not always represented in our picture books. So the stories that are on the right-hand side are more for upper elementary school, but this says it in a nutshell, right? We are still here. Native American truths everyone should know. Native Americans are still living with us, right? They're not a thing of the past. And this story, Bluebirds, I just adore. It's a story in verse about a friendship between a Native American girl and a girl that comes over, you know, like from England, right? One of the first settlers, one of the first white settlers, and their beautiful friendship. And Carolyn Starr Rose, she's written many other stories since Bluebirds that are just as gorgeous. So what, like I said, I'm going to say about them is that we don't just read these stories during Thanksgiving. All right, well, that brings us to our next keynote speaker, and that's Maria Padian. And I would like to suggest that her stories are beautiful, empathic stories, right? I was just talking to Robin this morning about the story Wrecked. Oh, I don't know if I want to go there with that story, but she said she loved it and it rocked her world. She actually had to read something a little bit more lighthearted afterwards to kind of take off that sting. But they're important stories. So in stories that we might not have experienced ourselves, but they bring us this sense of empathy, sense of where is that middle Venn diagram, right? What do we share with some of these people that we think we have nothing in common with? And so these are some of my favorite books that teach empathy. And what I would like to say about these stories is just take them in, just take in their front covers. They're all so soft and sweet and quiet stories, right? And I think that when we teach our kids empathy, I think that's what we're doing, right? Is to be a listener and to be soft. And we're not always giving our advice, but we're just taking it in. We're taking in other people's stories so that we can understand how we can be a better friend, a better ally, just a better person in general. So all of these stories teach empathy in one way or another. I'm a huge fan of Erin Stead. She has the two books at the bottom, The Uncorker of Ocean Bottles and The Sick Day for Amos McGee, which is probably my oldest story that I suggest. I'm a real big fan of contemporary literature, and this one kind of is on the bubble, but I still just think it's such a beautiful, sweet, sweet story. So I think we do have to teach our kids empathy, but if you remember from the beginning of when we started together, not all these stories have to be giant, big lessons either. They can just be, like I suggested on the front covers, quiet stories that we just take in and listen and read with each other. It doesn't have to be something big and grand. And then we just put it up on the board, right? Maybe later on, something will present an opportunity that you can be like, remember when we read I Walk with Vanessa? Which, by the way, is a wordless picture book, so it would be a little bit hard to read. But when we enjoyed that story together, like this reminds me of that time and how we can solve that together.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. So again, there is so much to learn about empathy, and there's so many different ways that we can teach it. Okay, so that brings us to our last presenter, which is Carrie Ann Holt. And so by trait, she's a middle grade YA author, but she has this beautiful picture book called I Wonder. And I didn't even know about this story. And I say that facetiously because I know about a lot of stories, but I didn't know this when I started researching her. So it says that this story is about divergent children and how they think about the world. And so when you read this story, it's a list of questions, kind of like, I wonder if my belly button is a universe. Okay, so some of us in our adult world, we might be like, that's ridiculous. But it's not, right? Some of our kids that are sitting within our classrooms really are wondering about these things, right? And so when they're off daydreaming or not paying attention to you, they might really be wondering if their belly button is a universe. And so I think it would be so lovely to create a class book about these multiple ways of thinking, right? So here's some of my favorite picture books on perspective and looking at different things, looking at things in a different way. So just like I Wonder, I love this book called Love by Sophia, and I'm going to give you a preview of it in just a second. Not only for the story and how it teaches a lesson on art perspective, but also because her family is so beautifully diverse and you don't even wink about it. It's just part of the story. I love the book, They All Saw the Cat. If you've ever read this book, everybody's looking at the same cat, but they all are looking at it in a different way. So if a mosquito or a fly, I believe, looks at a cat, they're looking at it through those multiple lenses of their eyes and not just direct vision like us. So yeah, we all see a cat, but we're all seeing it in a different way. Now, this book down here, Double Take, doesn't get a lot of popularity, and it's really a math book by trait, but it's a beautiful story about looking at opposites, right? And perspective. So right now, the windows in my library are far away, but as I walk up to them, they're not far away anymore. Your perspective can change on things. And I think that's a beautiful thing to teach kids, is not everything is always going to be the way it is. Like, things might change. Your view and perspective might change. Oh no, I don't think I have the link there, but this Love by Sophia is just so beautiful. All right, and lastly, we have Ellen Hopkins. So not only do I adore her because I believe she's still a native Nevadan that lives up north. That's okay, we won't hold it against her. She writes really hard, compelling stories. And so what I would like to say about her is, even though her stories are hard and oftentimes about substance abuse, which might not be super appropriate in our elementary school settings, I think it's important to acknowledge. But what I really love about her is that I read her book Crank in 2013 at a Zader conference with, I see Dr. Lads in here. I read this after she had presented at a Zader conference. And it just rocked my world. I remember reading it with a teacher friend that I attended it with. And I was like, let's read this together and have a little book club. And we were like, oh, every day we'd come to school. Did you get to this part yet? Did you get to this part yet? And it was just powerful and beautiful. And then along comes like Kwame Alexander in 2015 with the crossover. Like he gets a lot of credit for these verse novels, but there are so many more out there. So how I want to bring in Ellen Hopkins with this twist in elementary school is I want to suggest that we read more poetry, right? I love that Dr. Bickmore opened today's session with a poem. I will self-admit that poems were not my favorite growing up. I always considered myself to be a little bit bubblegum and not very deep. And I'm not suggesting that poems have to be deep, but I guess I just didn't understand them. But I think the older that I get, the more that I read, the more that I understand the world around me, I appreciate poetry so much more. And so all the books that you're looking at right here, some of them are picture books, like How to Read a Book by Kwame, like such a beautiful verse picture book, and Crown Ode to the Haircut. I love this story. It's so beautiful. And anytime I see my kids, I say, like your cut, G. They just think it's hilarious that I know that that is a meme that's online. It's an instant connection with kids. And just like really fun, simple stories like Pickle Juice on a Cookie, which is truly a story about loss. Not in a way that you would think about it, but in a beautiful, moving way. She loses her babysitter. I mean, it sounds so simple, but these are some of the kids' things that they're going through. They really are hitting hard in their worlds. And I love this book, No Voices Too Small, 14 Young Americans Making History, so that kids can see that they do have a voice. They can make a difference. I know I had a conversation with a fourth grader in the lunchroom yesterday because I'm teaching summer school. He's from Mississippi. Miss Streets, our school lunch sucks. I said, oh, I don't know because I've never had it. He goes, well, in Mississippi, we had dish up schools. And I was like, oh, that sounds lovely. Why don't you write a letter to the people in CCSD and let them know what you're thinking? I can do that. Yeah, you can do that. I think he might actually try it. And hey, maybe nothing gets done, but at least he knows that he has the power that he could try to make some change in this world. Okay, so some final thoughts. I just want to encourage all of you to read widely, right? Just because you are a kindergarten teacher or a government teacher in high school or a professor at a major university, read widely, read across all the levels. And all of these books that we suggested are everyday books. There doesn't need to be a special holiday or month of celebration or something significant that happens in our world to prompt you to read them. They are all there to read every day. Don't limit yourself or your students, right? Like I just said, read widely. Always seek new learning experiences. I love that Dr. Bickmore said there's a couple of different kinds of teachers. I'm definitely an omnivore. I have a hard time saying no to anything because I don't want to miss out on any kind of opportunity. Make sure that we're trying to amplify and affirm joy and humanity in our readers' hearts, right? Like we want kids to love to read. And then that quote that I brought to you at the beginning with Dr. Donovan, which is really one of my heroes, nurture your reading life so that you can nurture your students' reading lives. And there's some of my contact information if you wanted to get a hold of me. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. We're gonna drop the link so that you can have this in your files, or if you want to go back, I know I always like take screenshots of things, but you don't need to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing and drop it in the chat. And then Morgan, you let us know what we need to do.
I am back. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. Lots of kudos in the chat for you. Love a lot of the recommendations and how amazing you are. I second all of that.
Thank you, Morgan.
If you have questions or comments, if you want to put them in the chat, we can do that. If you want to unmute and ask them, you can do that as well.
Also, I was telling Morgan before we started, like if you have any more suggestions too, right? Like I'm not the end all be all at all. So if you have something that you were like, oh, here's a beautiful book that represents empathy or gender fluidity or just anything that wasn't mentioned, we'd love to hear those ideas too.
There is a new book on mindfulness that I can't remember now. I'm going to go grab it. Please hold.
Okay, perfect. I love that Morgan talked about mindfulness. I actually skipped over it, but in my notes on the empathy page, I skipped over it, but I said we need to practice mindfulness with our students. A lot of emotion journaling, or even just role playing. Like, how would you feel if this happened to you? Or if you were this character in the book, like how would you handle things the same or differently? So I think practicing mindfulness is very, very key. And it could be something simple, just sitting in quiet for a minute. Kids don't even need to meditate. Peter Reynolds has some really beautiful books on mindfulness. if you just look up Peter Reynolds, like anything that you bring in on Peter Reynolds is gold.
I'm back.
What is it? Share with us.
It's called Too Many Bubbles.
Oh, I don't know this book.
It is coming out in July, so it's brand new.
With a fancy new book.
But it's about a kid, and basically they get a bubble, and the bubble's still there the next day, and then you get more bubbles. And then you get more bubbles, and the bubbles are obviously euphemisms, but it kind of keeps going. And so it's all about kind of getting over the bubbles. And then at the end, it has these tips for mindfulness for kids.
How beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Morgan. And I see Robin put Maybe by Kobe Amati. I love any book of hers. They are so gorgeous. I just saw a meme this morning, you know, like you do your daily social media check-ins, right? And it was this heart, and it had a whole bunch, it got baggage on it. And then it got like stress on it. And then it got something else on it, and it trips over a little crack. And then the brain says, and it's like having a full meltdown. And the brain's like, aren't you being a little bit over dramatic? But just like too many bubbles, like these things start to pile up. And if you just trip on one little thing, that could be, you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so not only are we dealing with stress as adult beings, our kids are dealing with stress as well too. So practicing mindfulness. I know I have one class, her name's Mrs. Love. Every time her kids come to the library, they take a volcano breath where they, and then they come into the library, and it's just so fun. Like I do it with them because I feel like I need to just bring it down a little bit. So just little tips like those kinds of things can make a big difference in kids' worlds.
There's also Too Crowded, which is about a little goldfish whose bowl is too crowded. And so he's very unhappy. But he goes to find like a new place to live, but obviously he's a fish and now he's in a bird's nest, and that doesn't work. And it's kind of about finding your place. And in the end, he winds up with a turtle back in his little bowl, and it's not too crowded. Our house is perfect. But it's that idea of like accepting, you know, who you are and where you are. So, and
I love it already.
Huh?
I love it already.
Cute. It's really cute about acceptance, and it is for that. I'm a high school teacher, but for the elementary, it's very non-confrontational, there's really nothing anyone can complain about.
Yeah, it's safe, right? That's what I think that's what I adore about the one book that I put in my presentation, the mixed up colors, because it's just colors, right? But it could represent so many more things, right? Absolutely. And like, that's what I like to think of books. And we talked about this, Morgan's a classmate of mine and a friend. But we talk about this, it is important that we have these diverse books. But I'm more and more thinking that we shouldn't necessarily have just multicultural books, because then it puts them in one place here and then all the other books in another place. I like to think of books as like themes or big, broad concepts. That's why I brought to you like identity and teaching empathy. And within those books, we should have a variety of representation within them, not necessarily saying, oh, the mixed up colors is a book about multiculturalism, or fry bread only belongs in the multicultural section. It doesn't. It belongs on the shelf in general. It just happens to represent the Native American culture. And that's a beautiful thing, but it also teaches about family and culture and connection. So I like to think of books in those big, broad terms, but I also like to be specific and name what it is as well.
Dr.
To honor that. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say that.
When Nikki told me that she was going to do a session to pair YA authors with picture books, I was delighted, because being able to teach YA children's lit and children's lit combined in a master's level course, we have a lot of high school teachers, Morgan, and you'll probably agree to this, that say picture books do not belong. So when Nikki's like, I'm going to show everybody, I'm like, yes, do it, girl, because there is this constant debate that big kids don't like baby books, and they're not. The concepts like the K.A. Holt book you mentioned, the questioning and just the open opportunity for dialogue. Like, I'm just so delighted with your session, and I just wanted to give you some props, Nikki. I mean, I adore you, but I just think the constant conversation needs to keep going, and for teachers to recognize picture books are invaluable, and no matter what space it is, adult or YA. So thanks for bringing that today. Sorry.
As a high school teacher, picture books are definitely welcome in the classroom, and big kids like them. The only difference between a kindergartner and a 12th grader is height.
True.
Dana, I see your hand is raised.
So yeah, I loved all the books you have. I already have some of them in my Amazon cart, but I had a question. So I saw earlier on one of your slides, you had like one of the bulletin boards up, like to keep track of what students read. I felt like this year I had such a hard time with getting the kids to read like something different. Like I did some like interest inventories, but like I couldn't get them away from like Dog Man and Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Like, and don't get me wrong, like I love that they are reading what they love, but like with that bulletin board, like would that be something, like how would you do that to like broaden the students' reading choices? Like how?
I love that question, Dana. So when I put that in my presentation, in my mind, what I was thinking about is things that you read together as a classroom, right? So that everybody could feel this sense of success. So for those kids that aren't picking up the books and reading, they still have a whole wall of all the things that they have read together as a class. But what I would like to say to you, Dana, is this is a common thing. I mean, this, you know, kids always go to what's comfortable for them. And think of the year that we've had with our students and all the stress that we've been through in and out of hybrid. Like Dana, for those of you that don't know, is a 5th grade teacher. So she was online hybrid for a long time and then like thrown back in the classroom. Like, can you imagine the kind of stress that happens with the kids? And what if they're at home with parents that don't have a job? Like how that would affect them. So I would suggest that reading Dog Man and Diary of a Wimpy Kid this year and not letting them or pushing them out of that bubble is an okay thing because it's a sense of comfort and security for them. So it's okay, right? And things will maybe get back to a little bit normal, whatever that is later in the future. But sometimes kids go through these ups and downs where they're willing to try something new and then they're not. They want to stay with what they're comfortable with. And then they're willing to try something new again and then they stay with what they're comfortable with. Like I know myself as a reader, I didn't really read on my own until I was in 5th grade when the Babysitter Club books came out. Like I wanted to be Claudia so bad because she was artistic and fun and different. I'm not Asian, but she was just so cool and different. Like she always had the best clothes and the coolest phone and all that.
Sorry to interrupt, but I need to remind the CCSD teachers to put your name and that you're with CCSD in the chat so that everyone knows that you stayed the full time.
Thank you, Morgan.
You're welcome. And then Alice, are you going to leave this one open or are you going to close it out and reopen it?
I'm going to close it out and reopen it so that the chat can be saved.
That's what I thought. So those of you that are just getting here, hold off on putting your name in the chat right now because we're going to.
Yeah, and I know Tina wants to get set up because she's speaking next.
Yep.
She's wonderful. So if you're elementary, I would highly suggest you stay. She works wonders with kids.
Who's a CCSD teacher who was here for Nikki's, go ahead and make sure that you get your name in the chat before Alice shuts it down. I don't want anyone to be on the hook for having to pay for this.
I just want to say thank you guys for coming and being supportive, and I'm happy to answer any questions or engage in any kind of conversations later on. So take care and enjoy.
Going once, going twice.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you. I loved it, Nikki. Thank you.
Fabulous. All right, Alice, go ahead and shut it down and we'll all come back.
All right. See you in a few.